Let the portal begin. One name already out the door, and a familiar name around Columbia could be coming. Let's talk about it on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And you know what? I try to always keep my promises on this program. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to break one later today. After last winter, the Jonte Porter debacle, I said I was done talking about the Porters on this program. Well, stuff happens. Gonna have to break the promise here later in the show. I do want to start by saying today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with me for the Armada Team of the Week just a little bit later in the episode. But I want to start off talking about Aiden Shaw, who has officially now become the first member of the Missouri transfer exit class this year, I guess is one way of putting it. And I got to say, I saw this one coming. If you listen to my previous episode, Shaw was the one guy I brought up as, you know, it just hasn't quite worked out for Aidan Shaw at Missouri. And there isn't, more importantly, I don't think this coming season there's an obvious path to a big role for him on this coming team. Quite simply, Shaw is a really, really athletic guy, obviously at 6'9", 6'10", whatever his exact height is. Obviously, height is not the problem, athleticism not the problem, but Shaw has always been a little bit of a tweener, as we used to say back in the NBA draft days. Do people still say tweener, I guess, sometimes? Well, in between position. He's not quite big enough to be a center. He's not a good enough rebounder, not beefy enough, that type of thing, to be an SEC center on any type of consistent basis. But also, these days, if you're going to play the power forward position, you almost have to be a shooter at this point. And, well, Aiden Shaw is simply not a shooter. Regardless, the offense never came around like I thought it would, to be honest with you. Coming out of high school, I really was kind of waiting for the offense to come around with Aiden Shaw a little bit, and it just never did. And it just made him a little bit tough to keep out on the court at all times. But regardless, a guy I always really rooted for, I think by all accounts, from any time I heard about fans, especially young fans interacting with Aiden Shaw, always a positive experience. He seems like a very good young man. I wished him luck on social media and said, by the way, thanks for the dunks as well, because there were a lot of great dunks from Aiden Shaw too. A lot of fun with Aiden, even though if it didn't totally work out at the absolute peak of the ceiling that maybe we were all hoping for. And it may sound trite to say good luck to a guy who's heading out of the Missouri program, but especially in Aiden Shaw's case, I absolutely do mean it. Now, when it comes to the other side of the equation, players potentially coming into Missouri from the portal, well, Power Mizzou's X account put out about Javon Porter. Yes, Loyola Marymount's Javon Porter, but of course, Columbia, Missouri's Javon Porter as well. Power Mizzou put out, yes, Mizzou fans, I believe this is one you should monitor. Well, maybe we Missouri fans should be monitoring it, but I got to say, if I'm Dennis Gates, I'll give Dennis Gates some advice here. I think this is one he should take a pass on for a whole bunch of different reasons. Well, first of all, when it started last season during the transfer portal time, it seemed like there was a moment when Javon Porter was likely coming to Missouri. Well, that didn't happen for a couple of different reasons. Number one, the whole Jonte Porter situation with his gambling allegations and all of that stuff, that sort of surfaced and seemed to sort of submarine the Javon Porter return to Columbia. Then Porter later, actually less than a year ago, by the way, last April, was cited for driving under the influence in Columbia, by the way, and for speeding quite a bit over the limit as well. So, number one, Obviously, in my opinion, this is obvious. Obviously, a huge mistake there by Jevon Porter, but obviously the guy deserves a second chance. I'm just not necessarily sure that this is the best spot for him to have said a second chance. Does that make sense? Sometimes it's just better to get away from your hometown. I don't know, especially in a case where you have not only a famous older brother in Michael Porter Jr., but also a fairly infamous older brother in Jonte Porter at this point. Jevon Porter can go quite literally anywhere else in the country other than Columbia, Missouri, and be a significantly less of a celebrity and a public figure. I actually think that's good for that young man. But you know what? I'll put the personal stuff aside because I don't know him. I don't know his family. I'll let them make that decision. I'll focus on the basketball side. And from the basketball side, I just simply don't see a great fit here. Jevon Porter, at first glance, you see a 6'11" forward who averaged 12.5 points, over 7 rebounds last season in the WCC, and you might think, hey, there's a decent piece there for Missouri. In theory, he's a stretch type of player as well. He attempted 152 threes last year, but only at a 31% clip. And here's the thing with Jevon Porter. He is a volume scorer that is wildly inefficient. He doesn't even have a 100 offensive rating for those of you who track that type of efficiency stat. But more to the point, again, 31% from 3, just 45% from 2, 68% as a free throw shooter. And the problem is all of those efficiency numbers drop when he's playing against tier A and B quality competition. So when the quality of competition goes up, well, unfortunately, Jevon Porter's production on paper right now goes down. So my worry is that he's not cut out for the SEC. Quite simply, I just don't think he is. After 2 years at Pepperdine, 2 years at Loyola, 1 year, I should say, at Loyola Marymount, he has 1 year of eligibility left here. I'm just not seeing it. And fit-wise, you know, he's an okay shot blocker on paper, but again, against, you know, suddenly he's playing against tier A competition, and those shot block numbers go way down as well. For me, if you're looking for a scorer, I think you can do better than Jevon Porter. And quite simply, I think what Missouri needs is more of a defender in the paint, somebody to play along Mark Mitchell. Obviously, Josh Gray was that guy, but hey, ideally somebody who is more of an offensive threat than Gray, of course. But in my humble opinion, I think it is much more important for Missouri to anchor its defense next year, and I think the best way to do that is to get a rim protector. I don't think Jevon Porter fits that bill. I don't think he's a very efficient offensive player either. And number 3, once again, I think there is anywhere else in the country other than Columbia, Missouri, where he can go and have a lot less pressure on his shoulders. If I were advising him, I'd advise him to go anywhere but Mizzou. And listen, here's the thing. If it ends up that Jevon Porter ends up coming to Missouri, then, hey, obviously I'll root for him. I'll probably end up talking myself into it because that's the type of optimistic guy that I am. And maybe I'll look dumb here in a few weeks, but for all the reasons I just laid out here, I really just do not see that one happening. And on this program, I have to say all the quarterback talk for 2025 has been about Beau Pribula and Sam Horn. But what if this is legitimately a 3-man race for this fall? Heck, maybe even a 4-man race? Let's talk about that in just a little bit. But first, the Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week is the Arkansas Razorbacks. Remember, they make me read this copy, folks, but despite losing their first 5 SEC games, Coach Kiel Coach Keel's Hogs fought their way through the most rugged conference in college basketball to not only make the tournament, but by golly, they've knocked off now in back-to-back games a national champion and Hall of Fame coaches in both games en route to the Sweet 16. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Arkansas Razorbacks have done here. It's clear that our team of the week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. So I've heard and read some buzz in various places that Drew Pyne is still very much a part of this Missouri quarterback discussion. So is this truly a three-man race? Heck, is it maybe even a four-man race if you throw true freshman Matt Zollers in there? Well, really quickly, by the way, on Zollers, I'll just say this. After he had that obviously horrible-looking ankle injury during high school this past fall where his foot was pointing the wrong direction, just the fact that he's up and throwing and working out with the team in spring ball, I'd say, is great news. That's all you really want to see, I think, if you're a Missouri fan at this point. But to expect him to be the starter this fall, well, let's not put the cart before the horse just yet. Now, that's the idea of Drew Pyne being a part of this race. I think during practice, that's not terribly surprising that Pyne is going to look good. He's, when the bullets aren't actually flying in terms of live tackling, well, I think Pyne's going to look okay. He's a veteran guy. He knows the offense. He knows what to do, where to go, all that good stuff. Certainly a lot more experience on the field as a starter than anybody on Missouri's roster. But to me, most of that experience, by the way, at Notre Dame. But to me, barring injury, especially to Pribula specifically, I'd be absolutely stunned if Drew Pyne was your week one starter, because quite simply, we've seen Drew Pyne as the starter before, and it just wasn't that great. I know he beat Oklahoma. I know he's 1-0 as a starter. So if you're all about the dubs, I don't have any much to argue with there. But to me, I just thought his physical limitations were pretty obvious. And when he came in against Alabama, obviously that went horribly when he had to come in for an injured Brady Cook. You can give him a little bit of a pass there, but obviously less than ideal circumstances in a really tough weather game against the Sooners as well. And to be fair to Pyne, it seemed like he got some rhythm, found some offense as the game went along there, and did what he had to do to help win that football game, to be sure. But again, to me, the physical limitations, he's just such a small guy, relatively speaking. He is, the arm is not particularly strong, and I don't think he's really a scrambler either. So what's left? I'm not saying he can't be an important part of the team and a decent backup, but I think the idea that he's could be part of the Missouri starting quarterback race, frankly, I'm just not taking that all that seriously at this point. Now, in the wake of Missouri's loss to Drake, hey, that rhymed, not too shabby, but for real, in the loss to Drake and all of the commentary in the following there, you just see a lot of, well, Dennis Gates, what a terrible coaching job he did. Basically just coaching bad with no real specifics about what Dennis Gates did wrong as a coach in the ball game. And I do mean literally none in most cases. So I'll just say, not that Dennis Gates was perfect. I obviously had my complaints too. What I wanted Gates to do was play Mark Mitchell and basically four guards around him who could switch all of the Bennett Sturts ball screens. Just keep a guy who's 6'3", 6'4 plus in front of him at all times. Just make him score one-on-one. That would have been my overall strategy, offensively and defensively. Whether you agree with that or not, hey, at least it's a take. But the one take I've seen pretty consistently is that, in retrospect, since Missouri lost the game, I've seen a lot of people say, well, Dennis Gates shouldn't have switched up the starting lineup. because apparently, well, it'd been working all year with Caleb Grill coming off the bench, so why would you change it now in the NCAA tournament? I think people are overanalyzing the change of the starting lineup a little bit, and I liked it when he started the game because, well, with Grill in there for Trent Pierce, again, you basically did what I was calling for to start the game. That's what I wanted for most of this ball game. 4 switchable guards and Mark Mitchell. I just thought that was going to be the toughest lineup for Drake to contend with on both ends of the court. Now, it didn't start off great, so maybe you didn't love the results, but to me, the solution was not then to play 11 guys in the first half. That's not what I would have done, quite simply. So that's a fair criticism for sure. But I just think that, you can't change the starting lineup now. I would kind of agree with that if Missouri had been playing its best basketball the last 3 weeks heading into March Madness. It's not as though the Tigers were clicking on all cylinders anyway, and unfortunately, I think what ultimately hurt the Tigers is something I noticed in Game 1 against Memphis and something I had preached all season, which is that the Tigers' best 5 players offensively didn't match up with their best 5 players defensively, and there was just always going to be a give and take there that I think ultimately kind of cost Missouri a little bit in the end. But really my frustration after the game in the wake of the loss to Drake, my frustration was much more with just Missouri basketball in general than just simply losing a 6-11 game to a team that you're 6.5 point favorites against. In fact, I had one listener who said, an upset? What are you talking about? This whole thing that, a lot of people pick Drake. Like, man, I hear your point, but I'm sorry, when an 11 beats a 6 and the 6 is favored by 6.5 points in Las Vegas at FanDuel Sportsbook, that means it's an upset. Could you be a little bit less pedantic? Pretty please. But I digress. The point here is that it's not so much that one loss in and of itself is that much of a disaster. It's just, as a Missouri fan who's followed this team for 35, 40 years, whatever it's been, my goodness, have we suffered one too many of these at this point. I just couldn't take it. I just really needed one win, and the fact that we couldn't get it, it was just a little bit too much for me to take at a certain point. And by the way, speaking of Drake, Ben McCollum, their coach, who was at Northwest Missouri State, took Bennett Sturts with him for 1 year to Drake. Well, after that 1 year at Drake, guess who's entered the portal? Not only Ben McCollum, but Bennett Sturts as well. They're both heading to Iowa, so the Hawkeyes getting an interesting upgrade there. Makes a lot of sense. Obviously, Drake, an Iowa school itself, so geographically makes all the sense in the world. But I'd say Bennett Sturts will probably be getting a pretty good NIL package there, which I find a little bit interesting too, because famously, Iowa's previous coach basically went public and complained about how Iowa's NIL program was not up to snuff, couldn't keep Tony Perkins, for example, the Missouri senior guard this past season. So a lot of interesting stuff there, and also some interesting comments from Ben McCollum in the wake of the Drake game that sounded a bit like a shot at Dennis Gates to some people. Let's talk about it, and if Bennett Sturts has a point coming up here in just a little bit. But first, get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. And their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources, a complete inventory of more than 200,000 parts. And if you need help with an order, Supply House offers expert support and trade pros looking for that extra edge. Their free Trademaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the Trademaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. And as I predicted in the run-up to the Missouri-Drake game, and as I said, this was a really, really easy prediction, but Bennett Sturts and Mitch Miscari both played 40 minutes the entire game for the Bulldogs against Missouri, and a lot of people, including myself, made something of the difference in depth between the Tigers and the Bulldogs. Well, here's what Coach Ben McCollum had to say about that. He said, quote, "Depth is so overrated to me. What does it mean? You can play 10 guys so 5 can get out of rhythm?" Well, that was pretty pointed. I could really see how people thought that was a shot at Dennis Gates if you're a Missouri fan because, well, this has been a big talking point throughout this entire Missouri season. But quite honestly, I really don't think that had anything to do with Dennis Gates whatsoever. This is just much more Ben McCollum's philosophy here. Again, he plays the slowest pace. I should say Drake played the slowest pace in all of Division I basketball this past season. And the reason for that is obviously Ben just wants to keep, well, his 5 guys out there the best he can, or in the case, really 8 guys against Missouri. Really 2 guys who played the entire game and then another 6 basically kind of played a similar amount of minutes with that. Against Texas Tech, in the second round, actually, Daniel Abreu played 37 minutes, so an even more of a lack of depth, let's say, for the Bulldogs. So my thing was, I actually agree with Ben McCollum's point, his overall point there of, hey, why are you going to play 10 guys just so 5 guys can get out of rhythm, basically? I totally understand his point there, and there's definitely been times this season when I thought, Why is Dennis Gates not allowing guys to get in a little bit better of a rhythm here? There is no doubt that is a real phenomenon. There's no question. But at the same time, I did think that Missouri's depth was going to be a factor in that game, not because I thought, oh, we're going to wear them down so much, more because of malleability. I just thought Missouri had more options in terms of what it could do against Drake. For example, obviously I was saying, hey, go with a more small type lineup. Well, other fans, including some of my best friends, thought, you know what, we should have played Josh Gray more in that basketball game. Well, in my opinion, Missouri had the luxury of trying that and figuring that out a little bit more in the first half. And they quite simply just chose not to. I don't know, just chose not to play Gray and instead just kind of rotated out a bunch of guards sort of playing similarly. And then it was more just, hey, we're playing a bunch of guys so the starters can get out of rhythm instead of, hey, let's see what different type, can we go big here? Can we go small? What is the perfect 5 here? That's something we could have, I think, figured out in the first half and then just rolled with something in the second. It just seemed like we never got there. So I do think Ben McCollum has a real point there. At the same time, I do think that the idea of depth, yeah, it's not so much about so you can play so many guys and keep everybody fresh. It's about being a malleable basketball team. Sometimes you need a little bit more rebounding. Sometimes you need a little bit more shooting, a little bit more ball handling, depending on the situation, by the way. If it's late game, a little bit more free throw shooting and ball handling with the lead, that type of thing. So to Ben McCollum's point, yeah, you don't want to just play a bunch of guys or else maybe sometimes you just get your best players out of rhythm. There is no doubt that is a valid point for sure. And with all that said, thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast. March is here, so be the most informed fan throughout the madness. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So until tomorrow, I'm John Miller, and I'll have more for you, of course, on the basketball portal right here on Locked On Mizzou.